Right. So I was telling you in physics as a whole, we've got 7 units, right? We start off with measurement, we go on to Newtonian physics, we go on to energy and thermal physics, we move on to waves. Now we're moving on to the next topic. Okay? The next topic is electricity and magnetism. So it's an entire unit with a number of chapters or subtopics in it. Okay? तो इसके अंदर we'll be starting off with static electricity. Although अगर आप अपना physics के syllabus खोल के देखेंगे तो it starts off with magnetism. So I'm leaving magnetism for a bit later. So we'll discuss it along with electromagnetism in the coming lesson, inshallah. Okay? So we're starting off with electricity, and today we'll be talking about the different sorts of charges. We'll see what are the differences between conductors and insulators, electrical conductors, electrical insulators, why the differences originate, what happens. We'll see how static charges can be developed on different surfaces. जिसके लिए कुछ मैंने आपके सामने मटेरियल रखा है, you'll help me out, and we'll see why static charging occurs. ठीक है? So basically in a nutshell हमने ये काम कर रहे हैं. All right. Everything around us, in the world around us, is made of particles. We already know that, right? हमने kinetic model of matter पढ़ा है. We know everything around us is made of particles. From your knowledge of chemistry, can you also help me out and tell me what those particles are called? So, molecules, maybe a bit smaller than that. Atoms, right? So, describing atoms. By any chance, does anybody know what atom means?
So, it is consistent of proton and neutrons.
No, ठीक है, we'll reach there. हम उसका भी structure draw करते हैं, we'll see what that is. But what does the word atom
Everything
mean?
is made of atoms.
Sorry?
Everything is made
It
of
comes
atoms.
from a Latin word. I just can't remember.
Living mass of life. Maybe thought.
Everything is made of atoms.
Everything is made of atom. Atom means it's something that's indivisible. Okay? So something that's indivisible is atomic. और मजे की बात यह है कि आप केमिस्ट्री में तो एटम को पढ़ते हैं, लेकिन इंटरेस्टिंगली ना हम जैसे कंप्यूटर साइंस वगैरह की बात करते हैं उसमें भी हम कहते हैं एटॉमिक प्रॉपर्टीज हैं इस डेटाबेस की वगैरह. सो इट मींस ऑल और नथिंग, इनडिविजिबल, राइट? सो इन एसेंस दीज आर पार्टिकल्स that were originally thought to be indivisible. They were thought to be the smallest of all types of particles. But now we know better. So what do we know? अब हमें क्या पता है? What's going on? What do we know now?
That atoms have different parts.
Atoms have different,
Atoms
we'll call
cannot
them
be seen.
subatomic particles. Okay, fine. Can you give me
Atoms cannot be
examples?
seen by naked eye.
Okay, yes, we can. Of course, we can't see those with the naked eye. Of
Protons,
course.
electrons, and neutrons.
Protons and electrons and neutrons. So, say for example, we've got maybe a helium atom. We've got 1 and 2 protons.
Atoms are either
plus. I'll describe what that means in a moment.
So atoms have either positive charge or negative charge.
Those wouldn't be called atoms then.
Oh.
Helium has 2 neutrons. We'll see what that's all about. And they have 2 electrons. I've put a minus inside for that. Okay? So, ये जो subatomic particles हैं, we will call these electrons. Electrons. You can write these as well if you want, please. At the center, we've got a concentration of neutrons and protons. So, ये जो subatomic particles हैं, electrons, neutrons, and protons. These are the names of those subatomic particles. Can they be divided into smaller components?
No.
What do you think? Yes? So, can you split, for example, a neutron into smaller bits?
No.
Can you split protons into smaller bits?
No.
Okay.
We didn't know.
Fine.
We don't know.
So, at your level, in chemistry and so on, you're taught that these are indivisible. Like just like we thought that atoms could not be divided any further, and now we found out okay they can be divided further into smaller particles. So similarly, जो हम सोचते थे कि neutrons etc. all these subatomic particles cannot be divided any further, so in fact they can be.
So subatomic particles.
So sub कर ले आप उसको या they call bosons, mesons and और क्या थे? So I've forgotten all of the names. They can be divided further into subatomic particles. Okay? So an atom is a particle जिसमें you've got a small concentrated mass which is comprised of neutrons and protons. A neutron is approximately the same mass as a proton, and around this cluster of protons and neutrons, this is called a nucleus, okay? Altogether known as a nucleus. So around this we've got electrons flying around in orbits. So it's kind of like sun in the middle and you've got a number of planetary bodies orbiting it, right? So likewise you've got the nucleus that's comprised of protons and neutrons, and you've got a number of electrons flying around, okay? Orbiting. This is the basic structure of an atom, okay? Within an atom we've got two specific types of particles that we're interested in because we're talking about charges and electricity. Based on your knowledge of chemistry, what do you think those are? So charge, electrical charges किन particles पे होते हैं?
Electrons.
Electrons and protons, right? So that's why I put a negative charge and a positive charge respectively. Okay? So a charge is simply a property of some material with which it can interact in the presence of a field, an electrical field or a magnetic field. Okay? So किसी region में, we will talk about this in depth, किसी region में these particles have a property of experiencing some sort of force. You can imagine it as this for the time being. Okay? So this is the basic structure of an atom. Okay? There are two types of charges, so we can just jot that down quickly. So types of charges. There are two. They're known as they're known as positive and negative charges. So positive and negative charges. And these positive and negative charges are opposites of each other. Okay? So you can think of a positive charge as like the opposite of a negative charge. Okay? So kind of like a boy or a girl, it's like two gender opposites. Maybe perhaps that helps you understand that. Okay? Now all material is made up of these things called atoms, right? But the way these atoms combine, जो कि आप chemistry में पढ़ चुके हैं bonding में, so is different for different materials, right? So different atoms can combine in different ways to form different materials. So for example, two hydrogen atoms can combine with water to give you H2O, with oxygen, to give you H2O, which is water, right? But those two hydrogens could have also combined with 2Cl, chlorine, to get 2HCl. Okay? So different particles are combining in different ways to give different things. Alright, so keep that in your head now. I'll just get rid of this. There are different ways in which these combinations work, in which these bonds work. Bonds is combination, right? So in particular, we're interested in two different types of materials and the way they're made up. We're interested in things called conductors and what happens in them.
They conduct electricity.
They conduct electricity, they conduct different things. Okay? And we're interested in these things called insulators.
Don't conduct.
Okay? say they don't conduct.
They
electricity.
insulate.
They
They
insulate.
insulate.
Right. So conductors are materials like metals.
Yes.
So metals like maybe copper, iron,
Steel.
and so on. The list goes on. Okay? And insulators are
Wood.
materials like
Wood.
wood,
Plastic.
plastic, rubber, and so on. The list goes on. Okay? So the difference between a conductor and an insulator is that a conductor allows electrical charges or heat to pass through it, to conduct through it. Okay? Whereas an insulator stops it or prevents it or does not allow the free movement of charges. It does not allow the free movement of heat. Okay? That's the difference. Electrical conductor is with electrical charges. Heat conductor is with heat. Okay? But does it allow it to go across it or not? Okay? So that's the question we'll be addressing. So metals like copper and iron and so on, they allow electrical charges to pass through, whereas wood and plastic and rubber, etc., they don't allow electrical charges to pass through. But why is that? Why is that? Yeah, let me just draw an example of a conductor. Say for example, maybe this is a block of copper. Okay, copper कर ले, iron कर ले, जो भी कर ले. So over here we've got a number of atoms, these guys. Okay? So we've got a number of atoms. ये है atom, we've got another one, and they're arranged in this lattice structure, which means a fixed, organized, regular structure. We'll assume that these are solid for the time being. Okay? So a fixed lattice structure, regular shape, fixed shape. Okay? You can write it down if you like. Lattice structure. This is a key word. So fixed lattice structure. Okay? And within these atoms, you've got the nucleus containing the protons and the neutrons, as expected, and you've got a number of electrons orbiting it, right? But then, this isn't the only orbit. So you can have more protons. Perhaps we will talk about sodium, जिसके अंदर 3 protons and 3 neutrons होते हैं. And you've got 2 shells now. Okay? So the electrons aren't really distributed in the same space. Some electrons are distributed close by in the first shell, and then some other electrons are distributed in some outer space, an outer shell. So one of the electrons is left to zoom around in the outermost shell. Now this electron isn't very closely or strongly attracted to this nucleus. It's very far away. Okay? So what happens is कि ये जो distant electron है, we call this a valence electron. Valence is the same as an outermost electron. Again, a keyword. Okay? So this valence
What is
electron.
valence shell? Valence.
Valence in the valence shell. Okay? It will be lost. Yeah, it will join a pool, a collection of delocalized electrons. So what's going to happen is कि ये जो outermost electrons है ना, they will leave this particular atom. Say for example, it's this one, and they will join this pool, this collection of electrons. We'll leave it as a minus inside here. So this minus came from this one. Another minus will come from another atom, a third one, a fourth, fifth, and sixth. And so you've got this pool of delocalized electrons. We'll call these this a sea of delocalized electrons. Delocalized electrons. Okay? So this sea of delocalized electrons is loosely attracted to all of the atoms in general. ठीक है? क्योंकि there is when this electron leaves the atom, so the atom is left with 3 positive charges in this case and 2 negative charges, leaving an imbalance. एक imbalance create हो गया. Unequal number of protons and neutrons. Unequal positive and negative charges per atom. We call these charges that are now developed, we call these ions. So the black parts are now positively charged ions. These are positively charged metal ions. Because they have more protons, more positive charges than negative charges. ठीक है? अच्छा. So far so good. Are we okay to move on? Fantastic. So we've now understood how this sea of delocalized electrons develops. This sea is loosely attracted to all of the atoms in general. So this negative charge that originally came from this positive metal ion is not only attracted to this one, it's also attracted to this one and this one and so on. Okay? They're loosely attracted to all of them in general. And because they're loose, they're free to move around. So now when a potential difference, we'll talk about this in some time, when some potential difference is developed, some energy is supplied, it can push the sea of electrons so it can flow around through this lattice structure. Okay? So यानी कि ये जो positive metal ions है, they'll stay put, they'll stay where they are, but the sea of delocalized electrons is free to move. Just like if we heat this conductor at one end, so the sea of delocalized electrons, they will gain kinetic energy, and kinetic energy gets transferred across as well. Conduction of heat. Now the problem with insulators, these guys here, is they don't have that sea of delocalized electrons. ठीक है? तो उनके अंदर जो structures बनते हैं, they don't have these metallic bonds. These are known as metallic bonds. ठीक है? They don't have this metallic bonding in there. They have other bonds, like ionic bonds, like covalent bonds. So in that case, the way in which that bond is formed doesn't release any electrons, any valence electrons into this collective pool. Doesn't happen. ठीक है? ये चीज नहीं. So because it doesn't happen that way, तो let's say कि आपके पास इस तरह से कुछ molecules हैं, perhaps like that. The electrons are shared between those two atoms, and that's it. It doesn't join this collective pool. It's not loosely attracted to all. No, it's just attracted to its own original molecule. ठीक है? ये बात समझ आ रही है? Are we good to go? Fantastic. So this is why conductors can conduct heat. They can conduct electricity because they have this sea of delocalized electrons. इसकी आपने बात कर दी है, ठीक है? Whereas insulators don't. All right. Now sometimes when we rub two different surfaces, so some of these electrons can get transferred from one surface to another. It's like saying कि ये मेरे सामने एक टेबल पड़ी हुई है, it's a bit dusty, and you take a cloth and you wipe it, so that rubbing, that friction will transfer the dust from the table to the cloth. Understandable चीज नहीं? ठीक है? उसी तरह से कि ink के particles इधर थे on the board. When I take this duster and I start wiping the board with it, the ink particles are transferred due to friction from the board to the duster. ठीक है? So similarly, if we rub a material, perhaps like a plastic ruler, in a different surface. Yes, like a plastic ruler, maybe a plastic comb. कभी आप लोगों ने कंघी करते हुए सुना होगा, you hear that crackling sound. Have you ever heard that?
मेरे बालों में बहुत करता
Right?
है.
आपके बालों में बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. Okay. Frankly speaking, just before you came, तो मैं भी ये ट्राई आउट करके प्रैक्टिस कर रहा था ताकि मैं आपको कुछ दिखा सकूं, जाहिर सी बात है कुछ चार्जिंग करने की कोशिश कर रहा था, एंड देन आई वाज जस्ट रबिंग वेरी हार्ड इन माय हेयर, आई डिडंट हैव इनफ हेयर, तो बिकॉज ऑफ दैट
Sir, there's a little game.
अगर आप लोगों के पास कोई प्लास्टिक रूलर है
Sir, a game है कि like if you rub the, you take small paper, you tear
Sir, can I go with this?
Yes, peaches in it.
You make static with your hair and you can you can make the paper fly with the static from your hair.
Yes. Okay. So right now you can see there is nothing on this ruler, plastic ruler, right? But now that I've charged it, so some electrons have transferred from one of the surfaces to the other. We'll talk about that in detail in a moment. So okay, it's not good enough. Can you help me out? Anybody?
Sir, क्या करना है?
बस इसको चार्ज करके मुझे दे दें आप. I don't have enough hair. What can I do? Side.
Sir, balloon के साथ भी होता है ये balloon.
Balloon के साथ भी होता है. Yes.
Stick on a wall.
Sorry.
You can also stick on a wall.
Yes, you can stick them on a wall. Thank you. Let's try that out. Wow! So we've got a lot of papers. We've got those paper piles in front of you, ताकि आप खुद भी इस चीज को try कर सके if you want. ठीक है? You can try it out with the plastic. So what's happened? Why did that happen? What happened was that some of the electrons, due to that rubbing, वही वाले जो phenomena जो अभी हमने discuss किया, due to that rubbing with the hair, so some of the electrons from this plastic or perspex material have transferred onto my hair. Not my hair, on her hair. ठीक है, क्योंकि very good. क्योंकि evidently मेरे पास इतने बाल हैं नहीं, मैं बहुत अच्छे तरीके से ये चीज कर सकूँ. Now, so if we write that down, so in order to develop a charge on a material, all you need to do is rub it, so there will be some friction, and the charge gets transferred from one material to another. So static charging, agar hum charging so over here you can just say when two surfaces rub against each other, some of the electrons can get transferred from one surface to another, from one surface to the other. Okay? Now, the surface that is giving off the electrons now has a deficiency of negative charges. Okay? So, overall, that material is left positively charged. Okay? So, the surface that loses electrons, never talk about protons going anywhere, protons are never going anywhere, that loses electrons is positively charged. Okay? And the surface that gains electrons is negatively charged, because now it has an excess of electrons, meaning it has an excess of negative charges. Okay? Now interestingly, मतलब आपको ये अब समझ आ गई कि how static charging can be achieved, and we also understand why it is achieved, right? क्योंकि explain means why. तो reason क्या है कि some surfaces will have an excess of negative charge, whereas others will have a deficiency of negative charge. So we understand this. Now interestingly enough, आपने एक रूलर के साथ ट्राई किया था and you saw कि काफी सारे paper particles came around. Can you help me out and chart this one as well, please? So I've got a metal ruler that I want you guys to try and charge. तो अच्छे तरीके से उस पे फ्रिक्शन के साथ try to charge it. ठीक है? Can you show me?
No.
ले आए इधर ले आए रब कर लिया अच्छे तरीके से. So fantastic. So I've got a pile of small paper clippings and nothing. We get nothing
Because it's metal.
because it's a metal. So it's not that charge was not transferred due to rubbing. No. Charge was transferred due to rubbing, due to this friction. Yes, charge was transferred. But whatever was transferred got conducted away because this is a conductor. So static charging के लिए static means still. इसके साथ आप बेशक कहीं पर लिख लें still. ठीक है? Static means still, stationary, not moving. So static charging के लिए still charge develop करने के लिए, not moving charge develop करने के लिए, we need an insulator surface ताकि once the electron is transferred, then the vacancy is not filled, and wherever an excess of charge is developed, that excess of charge cannot flow away. Okay? So this importantly can only works with insulators. Only works with
I always used to wonder why metal ruler
insulators. ठीक है? Static charge in metals and conductors is not through friction, that is achieved through something known as induction. We'll talk about that in the next lesson. ठीक है? This is part 1 of a 2 lesson series. ठीक है? This is part 1. ये पूरा का पूरा topic जो है static electricity laws and principles, this will be covered by the end of next lesson inshallah. उसके बाद we'll talk about the practical aspects. वैसे generally speaking, if you want to have a look at what we did today and what sort of materials are charged, which materials give electrons, which ones gain electrons, go over to page 309 of Physics Matters or page 313 of Colin and. ठीक है? So thank you. बाकी अल्लाह हाफिज़.